Hello and welcome. I'm Sam Califer, your host for Vision, the show where we talk all about the College of Arts and Sciences, as well as its faculty and students. Today I'm joined by Dr. Kelly Moser, an associate professor in the Department of Classical and Modern Languages and Literatures, as well as a new assistant dean intern for academic affairs in the College of Arts and Sciences. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on too and talk about all the great work you do. And so to start, I was hoping you could just introduce yourself and tell me how you came to study your field of expertise.
Sure. So I earned a master's degree in Spanish, and then upon graduating, I got my very first job teaching high school Spanish in rural East Tennessee. And very quickly, I realized I had a lot to learn about what makes good teaching and how students learn. So I went back to school, earned another master's in world language education, followed that with a PhD in curriculum and instruction, and that brings me really here.
Sure, yeah, and that's so interesting because we'll talk about your research here in a minute, but it's interesting to hear that you went and taught high school, and so you were in the trenches doing that work, and now you've come back and a lot of your research focuses on that. It focuses on professional development and specifically retention for teachers. And teacher retention is a big issue across the board, but especially in world language, the field of world languages. So could you talk, for someone who doesn't know, could you talk about why that's such a big deal and what some of the potential solutions are?
Sure. So teacher supply is a really complex issue involving both recruitment and retention. As far as recruitment, we know certainly that enrollment in traditional teacher education programs is declining. But we also know that probably the greatest way to solve this supply problem is to retain some of our best teachers. I kind of think of it as like a leaky bucket. We may be putting enough teachers in that bucket, but there are more and more who are choosing either not to enter the field upon graduating or who really are struggling significantly in those first few years and decide to leave the profession. So it's a serious problem. Nationwide, we're talking about 12% is the attrition rate. And then specifically in world languages or even in ESL, we're almost doubling that.
Wow.
So you're talking at least 1 in 5 world language teachers are not either remaining in the profession or are choosing to leave one school to go to another school. It's a significant issue. One of the reasons that this is happening is the invisibility of world language teachers and the discipline within their schools.
Sure.
Yeah, so related to that specifically, we mean, a lot of students aren't required to take another language other than English. And so these teachers aren't necessarily valued as much as they should be by their colleagues and administrators.
Right, it is sort of, in a lot of the students' eyes, it's just the class they have to take to get the credit. And so, yeah, and not having the resources or the, help, it can be very daunting. And so, and that is a problem because it's happening in a time that is increasingly more multicultural and diverse. I mean, there's so many different languages that are spoken here in America, and so it is such a big deal. And so I'm glad that you research that and are trying to fix that issue. And another reason I wanted to have you on is because we find ourselves in a very contentious time regarding humanities and then specifically foreign language programs. In the news, there's all these stories of foreign language programs being shut down or losing their funding. And so I wanted to get your take on that. In your view, what does a university and its students and the community lose when these world language programs aren't supported?
Right. Well, a lot. Just to kind of contextualize that, within the last 5 years, over 950 world language programs in post-secondary ed have been cut because of budget issues and administrators making decisions about what they think is more important to students, families, and communities. When we cut world language programs, we are essentially not recognizing diversity, multilingual diversity, multicultural diversity. And if we're going to say in a global society that it's important to solve these global problems by communicating with others in respectful ways, then we absolutely need to have world language programs. Plus, I would say every single career that exists can be enhanced by being multilingual.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that is such a big thing to have on your resume, and so people want that you have a second language that you can speak. Yeah, and more than that though, and we were just talking about this. It is, especially here in rural Mississippi, these foreign language programs and the professors that teach them. It's kind of the first window that these students have to see the world and see how cultures are different, and so. Yeah, there's so much that gets lost there, and so I'm glad that we could come here and talk about that.
Well, and then just connecting, like this whole rural concept. As you know, Mississippi is incredibly rural. And oftentimes individuals think, they have these misunderstandings about what rural spaces include. And rurality actually is these spaces have so much diversity. It's not just white people and farms. The U.S. South is becoming even increasingly more diverse.
Sure.
So absolutely, we need more world language teachers and teachers who can work with emergent bilinguals in the schools.
Yeah, it's really robbing the students of that chance to understand themselves, understand the people around them, and to enter into the professional world knowing how to navigate. People are different and they have different beliefs and cultures, and so just such a loss when these world language programs aren't supported like that. But I'm glad that you're here and you're helping to fix that problem. And so another topic I wanted to discuss with you is your new role as the Assistant Dean Intern for Academic Affairs for the College of Arts and Sciences. So can you tell me a bit about that role and what are some of your goals?
Sure. So I have started in this role with a very large goal of improving teaching and learning within the college.
Sure.
And so to reach that goal, I'm really relying on both my work with K-12 teachers, knowing how students learn, how to best train educators so that they can both reflect on their practice and then make those changes with students in the classroom. And then I think, too, I'm having to define, within the college and within this role specifically, what do we mean by effective teaching? How are we going to evaluate effective teaching? And think a little bit outside of the box. So my PhD work in curriculum and instruction has really prepared me to work with teachers across disciplines, using brain-based principles about how students learn. And it's been really exciting so far, because the faculty who I've worked with, just in the past couple of weeks have been really excited to be involved in how to improve teaching and learner retention within their various departments.
Sure, yeah, and it's so full circle, because you were that, foreign language teacher and you didn't have that support. And so now, so many years later, you're there helping, those colleagues. And so that's so great. And like what you were just saying, everyone wants to improve education, but what does that look like? How do you actually move the needle? But you have that research background into all these various educational issues. And so how do you think that research background will help you accomplish these goals?
Sure. Well, I think one thing that's really important to remember is, like you mentioned, we know that the most successful teachers have support from their colleagues. And then we also know that it's really hard to change someone's belief systems about teaching. You get into the classroom and you see something that's working. It may be difficult to get you to think a little bit differently about how you're teaching. So I'm bringing a lot of that research, knowing about those things, as I work with others and talk with them about what they're doing in the classroom. But the other thing, I think probably the most important thing, is that I don't want anyone to look at me or any of the people on the team that we're creating as evaluative. I don't want someone to be afraid for us to come into their classrooms. I want it to be something that is truly unique and empowering. So how can we engage in this discussion after we maybe observe your class, and how can we figure out how to provide our students with even better experiences than they may be having?
Yeah, I love that you are, you're coming to these high school foreign language teachers with all of the resources from the university and just trying to make them more effective and know that they're supported. And so I think that's such an important goal to have. And so, yeah, I mean, what are some methods or strategies you might use to make their teaching more effective?
Sure. Well, I think we need to remind a lot of teachers that students have to be active in the process. So sometimes we can't visibly see understanding. And so what can we do as teachers to see that students are demonstrating that understanding in the classroom? So I like for classes to be as active as possible. Students engaging with students, engaging with content, with texts, with the professors. I do not want students to be there passively listening to a teacher. They need to be as participatory as possible in the learning experience.
Right.
And then I think too, making sure students are very aware of learning objectives. So by the end of class, you need to be able to do this. And now can you do that at the end of class? And so connecting it to that makes it much more realistic and tangible for students.
Right, yeah, and you're not only empowering the teacher, but empowering the students to take that active role, and especially something with learning in a new language, you've got to practice. And so just, setting clear expectations for everyone and just being that extra resource for the teachers, I think will go such a long way, and I'm really excited to see what all you can accomplish.
Well, thank you. I'm excited too.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining me today.
I really appreciate being here. Thanks for inviting me.
Definitely, yes. So interesting to learn, and excited to have you part of the Dean's office, and you're going to do great work. And so thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Vision. We'll see you next time.